Happy Friday, guys, and it is a pretty happy Friday after mostly a rough week. The Bitcoin miners are seeing a nice recovery today. Bitcoin's up a little bit as well, and this comes after a pretty rough week with mostly red, to be fully transparent. And while this is a great day, the trend has been lately down. Bitcoin's under a descending resistance that it can't seem to break out of. Is this day the mark of a new bull run, or are we going to continue lower next week and in the weeks that follow? Well, we have two different articles, one saying Bitcoin is going higher, people are too bearish, and we have another article saying Bitcoin's going to 10K. I'll give you my thoughts on both articles, what seems more likely to happen, or if both of these articles are totally off. Bitcoin headed to 150K, claims a famed investor, slams bearish investors as drama queens. Now, this article is focusing on Mike Alfred, but he's not the only Bitcoin bull right now at this point in the cycle. Also, we have Michael Saylor, Tom Lee, Bitwise, Grayscale continuing to believe in higher prices over the coming years. And not just over the coming years in many cases, but over 2026, which if you believe in the cycle, that is not what we should expect. Here's his actual post. Everyone seems to think Bitcoin is going to go lower here, even though Bitcoin is deeply oversold, AI demand is growing, and liquidity concerns are about to improve. It's possible the drama queens are getting a bit carried away here. I'm still looking for 150K before 75. Now, this may just be a coincidence, it may not be, but this article also mentions that $10,000 price target from Bloomberg intelligence analyst Mike McGlone. Bitcoin could eventually slide towards 10K, citing signs of bearish exhaustion. Much of what the market has been looking forward to has occurred. ETFs, US leaders recognizing Bitcoin's benefits, broader mainstream adoption. Bitcoin may now be vulnerable to mean reversion. Going to 10K is not reverting to the mean. Now here's his post. And he starts off by quoting Michael Saylor saying, "We buy Bitcoin with money we can't afford to lose." Which, if you read into that a certain way, it makes it sound like if Bitcoin has a terrible bear market, that puts strategy in a horrible spot. Buying Bitcoin with money they can't afford to lose. If it goes down, they're losing that money. What Michael Saylor really means is money that they can't lose to inflation. He also says that Michael Saylor kind of is part of the reason why we saw such a big run starting in 2020. How many alts there are, 28 million cryptocurrencies. If you're wondering why the market's so saturated, why they aren't seeing new all-time highs, this is likely a major reason. If you have so many altcoins, the money is going to be spread so damn thin. He goes on to say, own it or wear it. I expect Bitcoin to revert back towards 10K. Some people say it's going much lower than that. Some people say the memes write themselves because of this ridiculous statement. From your lips to God's ear, Mike, I hope what you say comes true. This is the way to look at it. If you love Bitcoin, if you believe in Bitcoin, if you believe in a decade from now it's going higher, you want to accumulate as cheap as you can, you want to buy when there's fear, you'll make insane multiples rather than buying tops, buying when there's hype, buying when there's excitement. And it can be as simple as just following the RSI on the weekly, on the daily, giving you an idea of, should I trim a little bit? Should I buy a little bit? Trust in the cycle, buy during the bear markets, buy during crypto winters, trim on those peak years. It doesn't get any easier than that. Should we even remotely anticipate a 10K Bitcoin? I would personally say no. Should we anticipate 150K Bitcoin before a 75K Bitcoin? I would also say probably not. The trend is your friend. We've been in a clear downtrend. We're watching for a break of this descending resistance. Not only that, but we're waiting for that break of the descending resistance, but also a test of the 50 MA on the weekly, which Bitcoin does always test once it breaks under it to kind of confirm the bear market. You'll see in 2021, we broke it back in the end of the year, broke under it, found it as resistance, and our drop accelerated down to 15K. Keep that in mind, a 15K low. The cycle previous, we broke under that 50 MA on the weekly, found it as resistance, and the drop accelerated a couple weeks later, a couple months later, and we bottomed out there at $3,000. In our first cycle that topped out in 2013, we topped out here at $1,100 and something dollars. We bottomed out at like 156. Bitcoin didn't test the 50 MA until much later, and it didn't see lower prices after that. So 2013 is kind of the exception to this rule that we've been seeing in the prior two cycles. So, if we have any hope of seeing 150K Bitcoin before 75K Bitcoin, we have to break this trend. We have to break this descending resistance. We have to test and break over the 50 MA, which we could find as resistance. We could continue to find this descending resistance as resistance. And also following the cycle, 2026, based on the past, based on every single cycle for Bitcoin, should be the bear market. You can hate hearing that all you want, but that's the truth. Could things play out differently? Absolutely. But that's what we have seen every cycle for Bitcoin. Top out in the peak year, in our case 2025, last cycle 2021, prior cycle 2017, cycle before that 2013. There's a trend there. It's every 4 years. We also bottom out every 4 years. 2018, 2022, and possibly 2026 every 4 years. Now, I'm not here to say that this will always be the trend for Bitcoin. but it's just what we have seen throughout Bitcoin's history since its inception. Now, if we do enter a crypto winter in 2026, should we expect a 10K Bitcoin? Here's my reason why we shouldn't. Every cycle, we never revisit the crypto winter lows. In fact, the 2013 cycle peak was never revisited by the 2018 bear market, not even close. Although our last cycle bear market, the 2022 bottom, we did revisit and break under the peak prior to that, or the 2017 peak. The 2017 peak topped out right around 20,000, and as many of you know, this bear market, we bottomed out at like 15,000. But here's the thing, while sometimes we do retest our previous peak, you know, keep in mind our previous peak from 2021 was in the 60,000s. Even if we break slightly under that, like we did in the cycle prior, what could that be? 50,000s, which would be pretty reasonable, you know, the 200 MA on the weekly, which in past cycles we do break down briefly under. In 2022, we were under that for quite a while, the 200 MA, which was in hindsight a fantastic time to buy. While it's oversold, while there's fear, while people are saying Bitcoin's going to zero, while people are saying Bitcoin's going to 2,000 or ridiculous prices. Just like 10K, I think that's a ridiculous price. I personally do think a 10K Bitcoin is more ridiculous sounding than a 150K Bitcoin, but can we possibly see like Bitcoin in the 50,000s? I think it is reasonable. There is a reason to possibly anticipate that, especially if we continue through our bear market, which we're about 70 something days in if it has in fact started, or about a fourth of the way through. Here's something also that's interesting. Bitcoin, while it's not oversold, it is at like a 35 on the RSI. Last cycle Bitcoin saw an RSI on the weekly of 26. So what, like a 10-point difference on the RSI? You typically want to take advantage when we're getting to oversold levels. While we aren't there yet, we really aren't that far off. If we do see a test of these lows, it's possible that we sell off more, see that RSI finally hit oversold. It is the daily. It's been oversold before. In fact, it was oversold on our death cross, which is still the bottom, by the way. Of course, that trend could break if we do follow out a crypto winter. But you know, these are the times that you want to be dipping your toes, accumulating, rather than buying when it's overbought. You want to buy it when there's fear. You want to buy it when it's oversold. If you believe in Bitcoin over a decade, just simply DCA and ignore everything else. This video might be becoming a bit long, but I want to talk about IREN and CleanSpark, two of my favorite Bitcoin miners as a company standpoint. The most efficient Bitcoin miners, their joules per terahash are like in the teens, where others are in the 20s. Lower is better, more efficiency is key. IREN was a very consistently profitable stock, and this is one of the reasons why it ran so much. When you compare it to other Bitcoin miners, you know, they were consistently profitable much more often. While they did have a lapse at times, you know, during certain pullbacks for Bitcoin, for the most part, they were very consistently profitable. IREN went as much as 56% down from its all-time highs. Here's the problem. We really don't have any areas of support. It pretty much just ran like forest. One possible area of support is the 50 MA on the weekly here at $23, which might sound a little bit absurd, but keep in mind that IREN was a dollar stock back in 2022, and if Bitcoin continues its bear market, continues its crypto winter, we should expect lower prices from something like IREN, something like CleanSpark, and the other Bitcoin miners for that matter. I would be pretty comfortable accumulating more IREN at the 50 MA weekly. It tends to hold it up. There are times that it breaks under, but it's very briefly short-lived and usually, in hindsight, great buying opportunities. I would still personally hold out. I would still personally wait for this thing to find a floor, to bottom out, maybe hold at 50 MA and see some sideways action for a while, see some higher lows and higher highs bouncing off of that. For now, our trend is down, and just this weekly candle has created new recent lows. So keep that in mind. If Bitcoin enters a crypto winter, you'd probably want to avoid the Bitcoin miners for now. Wait until prices get more attractive. Now, what about CleanSpark? CleanSpark on the weekly did get a bounce at the 50 MA on the weekly, and it does react to the 50 MA weekly. You'll see that we broke under it, but you got a big reaction when we broke over, big reaction when we broke over, pretty big reaction when we weren't able to hold it, kind of sold off there, found it as resistance, then rallied over it. Keep an eye on the 50 MA. We want to hold that 50 MA. It's right here at $11. CleanSpark was lower in November of 2025. It was as low as $9. And when Bitcoin topped out in the 120s, CleanSpark topped out in the 20s. This is another one I'd be patient with. Watch for Bitcoin to break its descending resistance, at least get a test of the 50 MA. Interestingly, they are anticipating a profit, which is kind of surprising. Maybe when this guidance was given, Bitcoin was higher in price. Bitcoin's been in a downtrend, so they might likely not see this profitable quarter. Last quarter was unprofitable, standardized, negative EPS. But how are you guys feeling today? At least it's a bit of a recovery day. We need to see Bitcoin continue higher, break that descending trend, start seeing some more excitement again, so that can go into the Bitcoin miners and other Bitcoin proxies. But thanks again, guys. What are you watching in the market? Where do you think Bitcoin goes? Is it going to 150K before 75K? Is it going down to 10K? Always interested in your opinions. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Have a good weekend. I'll see you next time.